right? YouTube.
Right.
So let's call the meeting to order at 10:02 p.m. and we'll start with a Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, nation, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. So first up on our agenda this evening is a discussion of the 1920 budget and the potential impact of federal and state laws. And I will hand that over to Jen and Julie.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Barrows. We are at an interesting time, and I know that that doesn't even bear repeating because we are in unprecedented times, at least certainly in our generation, in that we are dealing with a close down of our schools of unknown duration. As of March 1st, we knew we had a surplus in the budget, and we were gathering up the details of what that might look like, as we do at this time of year every year. We usually accept purchase orders for supplies and typical expenses right into about the third or fourth week of April. And then the only purchase orders after that tend to be specific things for end of the year events. And so we were on course to finish our year as we typically would with it, and we felt with a surplus. And now we find ourselves facing situations that, as I said, are unprecedented and very hard to know how they will eventually impact us. So the safest thing I can say right now is that we came into the close down with a surplus. And we felt it was going to be a fairly significant surplus, primarily because of savings in insurance, staff turnover, a special education placement that was expected and then did not happen, underutilization of our magnet school tuition, and now we're going to have some additional savings, particularly in professional development, we think, as long as we're not being required to honor our contract, and perhaps in some fuel that's not expended in our bus contract because we purchase our own fuel. Some districts purchase their own, some don't. We purchase our own. Also, we think that there'll be some supplies that won't be purchased because we've, in a matter of a few days, gone over to completely online programming, and we're not utilizing paper workbooks or similar things. But there are lots and lots of unknowns, and the feds and state are both doing more than suggesting. They're telling us to comply with the contracts that we've entered into. Specifically, they've told us to honor our transportation contracts and to keep employed to every extent possible our staff members. So anybody we can find work for, meaningful work, we are being told to find work for. We also are feeding our students, and you've seen the numbers that come out in the district leadership team notes. We're feeding large numbers of people every day. That will continue into the holiday weekend and even next week when we're closed down. I'm going to ask Mrs. Pendleton if she would share some of the other details that you see in the memorandum that she and I put together. And there's even some interesting implications for the 2021 budget in the excess cost reimbursement, because while they have guaranteed we'll be getting our grant money this year, they may be offsetting it for any expenses we didn't incur, particularly in the area of transportation next year. So Julie, if you don't mind.
Sure. So Dan did a great job of kind of going down the list of things that we've identified so far that we think potentially could be surpluses, perhaps some more than others. Right now we're taking our best estimate at those. The Special Ed Excess Cost Grant, which is the money that we receive from the state each year for special ed, transportation, and tuition, along with all the related services for those students who exceed the threshold of either 4.5 times our per pupil cost or 1 times the per pupil cost if they are placed by the state. So we have a grant that's already been predicated on a number that we filed March 1st based on the expenditures we anticipated. And what I have recently learned is that obviously if some of those transportation costs are not expended, then or tuition costs or other services that perhaps can't be delivered under these extenuating circumstances, next year's ECS grant would be adjusted based on those expenses that perhaps don't get incurred. I don't think it's a huge number for us. I did go through each case that we're receiving funds for. But again, depending on what we do with our transportation contract, it will have a bearing on that number, and it will affect it if we don't expend what we said we were going to for the year. So that's kind of an unusual one, and one that could trickle into the next year for sure. Obviously, unemployment is a big question mark. As Superintendent Pruccio said, we've employed as many people as we can, but we do have a handful of people that won't probably be able to be employed for a variety of reasons. Some of them being food service workers because of medical conditions and things of that sort. So that's definitely going to be something I think we're going to have to look at for next year as well. And then we're doing a lot of facility work now because we've been, granted kind of circumstances that we wouldn't have anticipated. For example, Goodwin School, we hardly ever get a chance to seed the lawn there, and we're taking full advantage of getting that grass to grow as best we can on their playground area. We're doing some repairs, obviously, as we go along. And then we've had additional technology and program type needs that we've had to accommodate, and we may have to continue to accommodate those as the year progresses. So those are just some of the things we know. We're going to be going over our entire expenditure allocation in the next week or so, because now what we've done is we have annualized many of the employment contracts for those that are currently getting paid. So now we can pretty much zero in on the dollar amounts, whereas in other years, we've had times where we go right up to June 30th because we might have overtime or extra hours worked or end of the year work that needs to be done by teachers or curriculum writing or that kind of thing. Now we have a little bit better focus, I think, on where that's all going to land. So hopefully within the next month, we'll have a number that looks a little bit more solid, as solid as it can be, I guess.
I think the only other thing I'd add to what Mrs. Pendleton just said is in the unknowns, which I'm sure you've had an opportunity to read, one of them really has become known over time, which is that if we continue to be unable to return to school, we are reimbursing the early childhood tuition monies, and that will run a little over $40,000. We have already determined that refunding through April, as I said at our last board meeting, seems like the fair and appropriate thing to do. Though we have not unenrolled those students, and we don't want to. We want them to continue to take advantage of the opportunities. The other unknown to me, one that's on my mind, and this is a human factor, is our substitute pay. So when we first closed down, we thought, well, we'll save a lot of money in substitutes. No one's going out for professional development. And I think that we should not necessarily assume that that's true, because we don't know to what degree we will, even in our community where social distancing took place so early, we don't know to what degree we're going to have people out and ill. And so we're sort of leaving the substitute pay in our grand Excel spreadsheet of what we think will come in surplus and what will come in short. We've sort of left that one in the middle because we have no idea where that will go over the next month or so. And hoping to learn more in the next few days about what the governor and the commissioner of education are thinking for our future. But we're all reading the headlines, and it all seems like there's going to be some additional time added to our close down in the coming weeks. Do you have questions? I'm sorry.
One last thing, we will have to, you can explain this, I'm sure, in more detail than I, but it appears that we have to do some sort of negotiating with our bus contract, which is our biggest, biggest number right now.
Yeah, as I said earlier, thanks, Julie. The bus contract is, we know that the federal guidelines and the state has reiterated that we're supposed to pay our bus contract. We just don't know what that means. And it probably means something different for each district. And we've heard all kinds of percentages and numbers floated. And we're not sure what the logic is. So we're waiting for clarification. It has been promised to us that we will get clarification from the state level. But it is clear to us that we are expected to honor the contract. To what degree and what that actually means, we don't know, because every year we have a base contract, and then there's fuel that is broken out or included depending upon how a district pays its bill. We pay our fuel separately. And then there are all the extra runs for the athletic events and the tournaments and the field trips and all of those things that get added on to the base price. We're waiting for additional guidance, and superintendents and business managers across the state continue to have this conversation. Obviously we want to do what they're telling us we need to do, but we certainly don't want to expend funds that we're not supposed to be or shouldn't be or aren't being asked to expend. Any questions for us?
I have a question. This is George Chang. Just to get clarification on the is that me? Sorry. Just to get clarification on the reimbursement, the excess cost reimbursement from the state, in the sense that they will deduct what we don't use from this year. So my understanding is that we may save the money from transportation that we will get from the state, but next year when we have the actual transportation cost, that they will actually deduct the excess that we got in transportation that we did not pay for this year. Is that my understanding?
Yes, George, that's correct. However, what they do is they take that off the education cost sharing grant, which is the grant that goes to the town.
Okay. But
so, so it doesn't necessarily affect our bottom line, but obviously we need to be cognizant of the fact that if we're supposed to get $125,000 in education cost sharing next year to the town, they may get 90 or 100 or whatever that number is.
Yeah, I know we're quarter line, but I don't feel so bad about that. But if we do say, I guess my question is, if we do have money saved from transportation, for example, is there a way we could just earmark that and just keep it there, and so that next year there is a shortfall that presumably it should cancel out?
We shouldn't have a shortfall next year.
Well, I guess the plan was if they don't pay the full amount because they're deducting the unused portion this year.
Right, but it's not the excess cost grant that they'll deduct that from. It's the education cost sharing grant, which is the town revenue.
Right. I mean, that's what you said. And so if the town comes after us for that money, we will essentially have it. Which is why I said I'm not feeling too bad about that right now. But
so maybe
just curious.
So maybe the answer is, and this is certainly going to be the board's decision to determine all these pieces when we get closer to the end of the fiscal year. But if in fact there is a surplus, maybe some of that goes back to the town, and we can say it's for the, we want to make sure we cover X. And also we may be able to ask for some of that to go into our capital plan. So, you know, there's all kinds of options that the board will have to consider should we have surplus funds at the end of the year.
Yeah, or even if there isn't a surplus, to basically earmark how much more money we got from the excess cost grant portion that they might deduct from the excess cost grant next year, and just just bookkeep that.
Yep, that's absolutely. We can make all of those cases should we need to, once we have some of the details to what is actually going to happen and what that's going to look like.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's very thoughtful.
Any other questions from the board?
Sarah.
Hello?
Hello?
Yep, go ahead.
It's Jan.
Hi, Jan.
Sorry I'm late. Way back before the pandemic, I remember that the town wanted to take some of our surplus. Is that right, Jan?
The town wants to take some of our 1920 surplus, you mean?
Yeah. Remembering that?
On March 17th, the Board of Finance voted to remove $75,000 from our budget. And that was the dollar amount that we had targeted for our sinking fund for 2021.
That's what I'm referring to. Thank you. Is there any chance they, in light of these circumstances, not that they don't also have similar circumstances, that they would give that quote back to us to use, or can you not do that?
On March 31st, they voted to approve our budget with the $75,000 reduction. As a matter of fact, they voted, Jan, to approve both the board and the town side budget on March 31st. And in our current emergency situation, that is as far as it goes. So it won't go to a referendum this year. And they actually did that and set the mill rate on the same night. So I think it's a fait accompli.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jan. Any other questions?
Tara.
Yes.
I can't, I don't know if you hear me very well.
Yep, I can hear you, Eileen.
Okay, because I've been trying to make a comment, not on this, but before, but I don't think I was able to get through.
All right, go ahead, Eileen.
No, not on this topic. I just want to make sure for future topics you can hear me.
Yep, I can hear you.
Thank you.
You got it.
Hey, Tara?
Yes.
Jim here. How are you?
Hi, Jim. Go ahead.
Quick question for either Jan or Julie. With respect to the bus company contract that you discussed earlier, is that set up that we contract with them for a period of time or by the number of bus runs that we expect to see? How is that structured so that we can stay out of legal trouble if we don't use any bus services, but we still are in contract with them?
So that's a great question, Jim. We do set the number of buses with them, and we establish what our runs are going to be at the beginning of the year. And so this year, we actually we started with 12, and with the bus company, actually with their blessing, if you will, we've actually reduced part of a run. So we're somewhere around 11 and a half. And so we do set those, and we do have a steady number, so we know what that regular transportation, the guts of that contract look like.
Okay, I guess the thrust of my question was, are we on the hook regardless of whether we use 0 or 100 bus rides? How does that look if we go through the entire semester here without using any of their services, as far as what we're legally obligated to provide to the bus company?
Jan, you want to take that under the executive order?
Yeah, so both the federal government and the governor's executive order said that we are to pay our transportation contracts if we want. It sounds like I'm saying this in such a terrible way, but this is primarily what it said. It said basically that we're getting our federal money and our state money, and if we want to see that, we need to make sure we pay this transportation contract. What they have not been clear about is, what does that mean? Or perhaps I should rephrase that. Maybe they've been clear, but I haven't been able to understand it in the lengthy text. So we're waiting for advice from CAPS, the commissioner's office, and the governor's office. And we've asked this question of the commissioner's office a number of times, and they said their legal department would be explaining it to us. I'm assuming, Jim, that after it's explained to us, we're also going to need to check with our own attorney based on our contract, because of course every contract is written slightly differently. So we don't know what we're talking about right now. We estimated, and it seems like that's all Mrs. Pendleton and I get to do these days. We estimated that we're talking about somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 a month that we may end up paying.
At least, yes, it could be more than that.
Right. That's assuming we understand what the base means in this language.
Right. Our base 11 or so buses is all of that. And yeah, it's a chunk.
I wish we could be more specific with you, but we're reluctant to be more specific because we're not quite sure what it means just yet. And we're asking for everybody's patience, including the bus company, while we try to figure out what it is that we're being asked to do exactly.
Understood. Sounds like you're kind of caught in the middle between the state and the people who were looking to pay their employees, I would imagine.
Yes, it feels that way, because when we talk about it in our state meetings, it's often characterized as, how are these bus drivers and folks who work at our bus companies going to get paid? And I understand their concern, but I also, I don't know what percentage of our contract right now goes to the bus drivers, goes for fuel, goes for maintenance on vehicles, pays an administrator's salary. I don't know. And I would like to know that before I respond to the state's concern about people like bus drivers not getting paid.
But I think it is pretty clear that they are telling us we will have to pay them something, whatever that something is. And I think Jan did a good job of explaining that, we really want them to give us a little more clarification, so that the fact that we're all obligated to pay these contracts, we don't want our neighbor paying 95% and we're paying 75%. It just doesn't seem fair. So we want it to be somewhat equitable as well.
Any other questions about this year's budget? Okay, so we will move on actually to the 2021 budget discussion, and Jan and Julie, take it away.
Jan, are you starting or am I?
Starting. I was just calling up the memo. I'm hoping everybody can see my screen sharing, right?
Yep.
Oh, good. Okay. So the 2021 budget, as we started to discuss, Stan Furman was asking about it. We submitted a budget that was a 0.98% increase over the current year. At its March 31st budget meeting, the budget was set with a $75,000 reduction that had been taken by the Board of Finance on March 17, 2020. Again, that was listening to the discussion from the March 17th meeting, that represented the entire amount of money that had been put in the capital sinking fund. So that dropped the overall increase to 0.7% over the current year. or $185,276 increase. And that brings the total budget for 2021 to $26,706,023. Mrs. Pendleton and I have had more than one discussion, and I talked a little bit with Board Chair Barros about this. Julie and I are recommending that we pull that $75,000 from the sinking fund. And while that is somewhat contrary to the way we like to do business and the reason why we created the sinking fund, we'd like to talk more in the future with members of the Board of Finance, as to why that happened, why that particular $75,000, which I want to remind everybody. I know you know this, but this is a public meeting, and I want to remind everybody that the Board of Finance cannot decide where to remove money from the Board of Education budget. They can only decide to remove money from the Board of Education budget. Nevertheless, Mrs. Pendleton and I believe that because we're talking about a future expense, that's where the money should be reduced for 2021. And it's contrary to the way I know this board works and the way Mrs. Pendleton and I like to work. As I say all the time, when I came to work in Old Saybrook, I was, after being in a number of wonderful school districts, I was amazed at the condition of our buildings. They are very well taken care of. They're the kind of buildings that have been maintained in a fiscally responsible way. And that's what the sinking fund is really about. I gleaned from the conversation at the Board of Finance meetings that, if we want to put money from the surplus this spring, if there is a surplus, and right now it looks like there will be, big question mark. If we want to put money from the surplus into the sinking fund, that's something that we would go to them and ask them to do. And there is some money there too. As I said, we'd like to have a additional conversation with the Board of Finance because we'd like to understand what the line item is concerning to them. We'd like to be able to be sure that money is being put aside in that sinking fund every year, because we know we have capital maintenance and capital projects that will naturally occur, and we want to be ready for them. We don't want to always have to go out to bonding. We know that costs everybody more money than we need to, and we know there are things coming. Parts of the Goodwin roof, the replacement of the turf carpet. We know that's a cycle. There are a number of HVAC issues that could come up. God knows we saw our boiler issues this year. So we're disappointed, but we still think that if we're going to pull it from somewhere, a future expense is the place to pull it from, just as we would in our own accounts in our own homes.
Tara, just a comment. This is Al.
Yep, go ahead.
So it seems like we spent a lot of time, certainly Julie and Jan did last year, working through this sinking fund in terms of the protocol and how it would play out. And it just seems that it's contrary to the way, and Jane, you've already said this, it must be frustrating to you and Julie. It seems arbitrary, and I don't know, but that's just a comment I'll make and say no more, but it's got to be frustrating.
Well, Alan, for whatever it's worth, at the Board of Finance meeting, my comments were simply that we have really worked hard, Jan and I have really worked hard to make sure that this is appropriately funded. And our thinking and the Board of Education's thinking on the capital maintenance plan is to, put a plan out there so that there's no surprises, try to be as proactive as we can when we know things are becoming close to the end of their useful life. And it was evident to me, and this was a bit surprising to me, but at least one member who I think convinced a couple of other members was absolutely convinced that the only way we were going to fund this sinking fund in the future was from surpluses should we have them in our budget. That just seemed counterproductive to me. It didn't seem like the right approach, but I think Dan has a good idea that we should really talk with the Board of Finance more on this topic and really find out, how they expect all of these projects to be done, and yet we never have a guarantee that we're going to have plus funds in our budget. We don't know that from year to year. So that didn't seem prudent to me. And, you know, you don't want to replace the roof when it's leaking. You want to replace the roof before it leaks. You know, we're trying to be responsible. We don't want that $2.3 million maintenance bond down the road.
Thanks, Julie.
Tara.
Thanks, Julie, for that comment.
Go ahead, Eileen.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was listening in to the Board of Finance meeting, and I thought that Jan and Julie did an excellent job explaining about the Goodwin School gym floor. I mean, that took a lot of conversation. So I was confused. I didn't realize that the 75 was still coming out. I thought the 75 was related to the cost of the gym floor, or was it 65,000? I don't know what it was, but it seems that they could swallow that. But this is, why did they then take out 75? What was the rationale?
Eileen, we were not at that meeting on the 17th of March. I had started to attend that meeting late in the evening. I got a text message saying, you know, they're cutting our budget, and so I started listening in. So I can't honestly answer that, and I could venture a guess, but again, I'd prefer not to. I'd prefer to be careful and have a conversation. Mrs. Pendleton explained a little that, you know, we've heard, and Mrs. Pendleton heard more of the conversation on the 17th than I did. We've heard that there was a belief that we had said that we would only use surplus to fund the sinking fund. So I'm assuming we have a misunderstanding, and that's why I think it's really important that we go back and talk to the Board of Finance, members of the Board of Finance in the future, so we can clarify this misunderstanding and explain to them why we think just using surplus money to fund the sinking fund is not the most prudent way to go. And while, yes, we most likely will ask for any surplus to be put into the sinking fund, we don't want it to be dependent upon there being surplus each year. We also don't want to behave in such a way with our budget that we create surplus. That would not be good. So we want to be as transparent, honest, and straightforward as possible. I think we have to assume we have a misunderstanding, and not now, because now is not a good time for any of this, but in the near future, when things are more righted and more normal, it would be great if we could go to them and say, here's what our thinking was on the sinking fund. This is why we put a $75,000 line item in for the sinking fund. We certainly weren't trying to be duplicitous. We certainly weren't hiding anything. It was right there in the open. So maybe we've just misunderstood each other.
Okay, but still the explanation on the gym floor, they swallowed it, they understood it, but they were pretty detailed in your questions, and the responses are really very well delivered.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, what we find to be great is that our budget is about as honest and straightforward as we can get it. So answering any questions about it are usually pretty easy to answer.
Yeah, but that's great.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions for Jan and Julie in regards to next year's budget?
This is George Chang. Since we're talking about that meeting that happened on March 31st, I was curious about Carl's quote of state law 10-248, where the town actually, or the state, let me see if I can remember. This is where the school has to submit bids to the town for approval. Something along those lines.
I don't believe that was Carl's comment. I believe that was one of the other Board of Finance members.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this something that we worked out?
And I don't think that it really had bearing on our school gym floor, although maybe he was confused about the nature of the school gym floor. I don't know, Jan or Julie, if you have comments on that.
You know what? Thank you for asking that. I did not capture which piece of legislation he was alluding to, 10-248. So now I can go back and look it up. And why don't I do that and come back and talk about that at the next meeting?
That's great. Thanks very much.
Thanks, George. That was a good question. Any other questions in regards to the 2021 budget? right. Thank you, Julie and Jan. That was a good summary, and I appreciate the write-up on that. Moving along, we're going to go into policy now. So at our last meeting, we had the first reading for a change that we're proposing to our Series 9000 formulation, adoption, amendment, or deletion of policies. And we had a discussion in regards to making changes to policies without having a second reading, that we would do them, with one reading and then vote on it. And so this would be the second reading for that change. And I don't know if there's any further discussion that we'd like to have on this.
So I understand that actually this is due to the virus, the implications of the virus. So
That's
all of
correct.
these really, right. So when this all passes over, we're going to go back to two readings. Unless there's an emergency, obviously, then we'd have to consider just one reading.
That's correct, Aileen. So we're going to go, the plan would be to go back and revisit any of these changes that we made due to the pandemic emergency, and then reset them, back to our standard policies.
Correct.
Yep, that's correct, Eileen. Any other questions or comments in regards to this policy that we discussed at the last meeting?
This is George Chang. I guess this is a question for this particular policy, and then possibly it applies to all the other ones that we'll be looking at tonight. And this is, did the language come from Shipman and Goodwin, or did you guys come up with the language?
We created it ourselves, George.
Very nice. Thank you. Well, very well done then.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, George. That was a good comment. So with that being said, then do we have a motion on the floor? And Trent, if you could unmute everybody's lines. Could we have a motion for approval of the changes needed to the Series 9000 formulation, adoption, amendment, or deletion of policies?
I make a motion, Eileen.
Eileen makes the motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Alan was making a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Yes.
I apologize. This is Karina Julius. I've been trying to comment, but I've been on mute. So, not to interrupt the vote, but I did have a question about the wording on the policy, and it's just to ask a question. Am I able to ask a question, or because we're in the middle of a vote, I can no longer ask?
I think that you can. I mean, we are in the middle of a vote, but I understand that.
Well, it's just I just don't understand how I'm supposed to comment if I'm on mute. I've been trying to message through the meeting, and I've been unable to comment.
Okay. So go ahead and ask your question then. Sorry about that, Karina. And I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were chatting me.
I tried to send it to a couple, but at any rate, so my question is one that I believe was asked at the last meeting, and that is, I understand that at the completion of this pandemic, the policies that have been changed will be reviewed and revert back. I think it was George who asked the question last time about, can we just put a disclaimer in that at such time that the pandemic is over, the policies just revert back, in an effort to save some time and the potential miss of a policy.
So, Jan, do you want to comment on that, or?
Yeah. So for the purposes of this policy that you're voting on right now, that is the intent, is to revert back. But that won't be true for every policy moving forward, particularly our graduation requirement policy that we're going to consider tonight. Perhaps our credit for online courses and perhaps our student discipline, we may want to consider including some of the changes that we are including tonight in the future. So I can't say that it's universal for each policy, though it is for this one accurate that we would want to revert to what you said before.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. Thank you.
Okay, so we still have a motion on the floor. So at this point, I'll ask everybody to repeat. All in favor of passing the motion, say aye.
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 Are we
Aye.
all unmuted? Hopefully we're all unmuted.
Yes. And actually George isn't unmuted, so I don't know if George already said yes. There we go. And so that was all in favor was aye, and any opposed? Any abstentions? So that was unanimous.
Hey, Tara.
Trent? Yes.
So just to get clarification here, quick question. Cindy, you are not in the meeting, correct? It looks like she's not with us. So we have
Not.
8 board members present. Okay.
That's correct.
And for everybody else, just a quick clarification. I'm muting everybody during the presentations so that we can reduce background noise. You actually do have the ability to unmute yourself when you want to ask a question. So if you're on your,
call in.
I'm sorry.
Yes, you do if you call in. It's a *6 on your phone. So the asterisk and the number 6 that mutes you and unmutes you.
Right. So when you want to ask a question, you can unmute yourself, and then I'll remute you. It's just we've had some problems with some meetings in the past with excessive background noise. So during the presentation portion of things, I've been trying to just keep everybody muted, but I apologize. I did not explain that you do in fact have the ability to unmute yourself when you'd like to ask a question.
Even if you're listening in?
Yes.
Yes, that's
Yep,
correct.
You can do *6 on your phone, Eileen, and that will mute you yourself. And then you can do *6 again, and that will unmute you.
Okay, the first time I'm hearing about it. Okay.
Again, I apologize for the confusion. I did not explain that ahead of time, so we can utilize that going forward.
I make sure that we are all unmuted for the votes. So I think, Dan, we had agreed that we were going to step through these individually, the next group of changes. So we have basically the first reading, and we're going to vote on these as well this evening. And the first one that we're going to discuss is policy amendment to Series 5000 graduation requirements.
Yes, great, thank you. And this one is probably the heaviest lifting as far as having to get through the text. You will remember that our high school graduation requirements, we went through very carefully. We formed a committee a few years ago. We were just getting ready to form a committee again to update graduation requirements to reflect some updates in the law, but more importantly, some philosophical changes, or actually moving a little bit further down the road on our philosophy here in Old Saybrook. That unfortunately has been cut short a little bit. So what I'm proposing tonight is a bit of a hybrid. Some of these things will continue to be in effect into the future, and some of them the board will probably want to consider again. Starting with the blue text, so the red, again, using Shipman and Goodwin's usual style, red cross through is being removed. Blue is language that is either being changed or added. And this first section is specifically reducing graduation requirements for this current high school group, seniors, class of 2020. The state of Connecticut current credit requirement is 20 earned credits. This group was up to, I want to say, 23. We feel that given that we are in distance learning and the vast majority of our students are doing fine with distance learning, but we are concerned that we're only a few weeks in and we could be functioning in this way through the middle of June, that it's safest for this particular graduating class to have the credit requirements reduced to the state requirement, which is 20. The credits in English, mathematics, social studies, science, physical education, arts, or vocational education, the way they're explaining it, that tracks the law. That's what the law requires. Now, we have many students in this current class who also have internship credit and community service and lots of electives. This doesn't devalue the work that they've done. And many will get the vast majority will get well over 20 credits. I just was concerned that we could, at this very late date in their high school career, find ourselves really struggling with a few students, and I would not want to see them not graduate because of the current highly unpredicted and unpredictable situation we find ourselves in. Again, this is not an attempt to reduce rigor in any way. This is just an attempt to accommodate for those students who are counting on internship credit or credits that they just can't possibly get. I even have some concern for some of our students completing capstones. The capstone instructors tell the high school principal that most of those kids will have no problem getting across the board. They can finish up their projects now, truncated a little bit, but there will be a few who would struggle. So I don't know, do you want to pose questions just on that now before I move on to the next two groups, which would be the current juniors and then everybody after them?
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Trent, if you don't mind opening up everybody's line just in case they have a question at this point, because I think this is the most, this is certainly really important and urgent from a current time perspective. So any questions about the reasoning behind the changes here in this first section on page 1?
Chair, Eileen.
Go ahead, Eileen.
I just wanted to say that I think that's a very sensitive way of responding to some of the challenges that distance learning is impacting students. And it makes sense because if we have credits that are more than the state at this particular time, then that will really cover us well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Eileen. Other questions on this section? Otherwise, we'll move on to the rest of the changes in the policy. Okay.
Howard's in here?
Yep, go ahead.
Jake, I was looking at the sheet 1, and the credits that you have listed there only add up to 15. Are the other 5 of the activities and extracurricular things you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, they're electives. Thank you for catching that. I'll make sure that the electives get added. We'll put electives right under arts or vocational. And I'm glad you brought that up because that gives me a chance to talk about that next line too. Coursework completion in class or online or evidence of subject matter mastery. So it gives students multiple ways to earn those credits. That actually was in our policy. It's just that we've moved to the online piece to become something that is no longer, at least for the online learning that we are giving to students, no longer requires any kind of pre-approval process. So we'll make sure that the credits for the electives get added there. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. That was a good catch. All right. Any other questions in regards to this first section? And we'll otherwise we'll move on to the next section. Okay.
So the next section is for the class of the current juniors. I think I did the math on this one. I hope I did. And we would be putting, at this point, we will include the capstone credit there. They also have the 0.5 civics that was never broken out before. But really, otherwise, there's not a lot of change to the class of 2021 here. Where you'll see change is a little bit later on in the policy in the area of community service. And I'll wait and talk about that there, and I'll explain it there. But really, there's not a lot of change here. This section used to apply to them and to the class of 2020, but it no longer does because of our current situation. So then, moving on, class of 2022 and thereafter. I do need to make an additional change here. I was thinking about this, and I don't think it's all spelled out here. So class of 2022 and thereafter, you can see there's the addition in science, technology, and engineering. You can see that 0.5 personal finance class has been added. Also, the capstone for 1 credit is now a requirement here. And the one thing that is not really spelled out is the internship. We're requiring all of these students to have a minimum of a 0.5 in the internship. So that will go just before general electives. And I will add that with the understanding that when you vote on this tonight, it would be with the 4 electives added for the class of 2020 that Jim caught, and with the 0.5 for the minimum of 0.5 for the internship. Any questions for me on that one?
Question, class is graduating in, I don't know if we're there yet, 2022. Everybody takes personal, everybody's going to be taking personal finance. That's a requirement, correct?
That's right.
But some of these others are not requirements. 3 math, 3 science, 1 applied art, or they're all required?
Those are all required.
Except for the 1 STEM elective.
The what? I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Oh,
That's a requirement. I mean, it's 1 STEM elective. They have to take an elective in STEM.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for the class of 22 and thereafter? Okay, so moving on, nothing has changed on page 3. This is something we can all decide to look at in better times, but it is something that we vetted really carefully a few years ago. When we get to page 4, there are some changes. So starting with that second full paragraph, high school graduation credit will be granted. I added the online coursework language. I don't want there to be any misunderstanding that online coursework that has been provided by the Old Saybrook Public Schools does not require any kind of a pre-approval process. That if we're offering it, then it is certainly supported by Old Saybrook Public Schools. Later on, it talks about online learning being at the expense of families. And when we wrote that, we were intending it to be about the folks who wanted to take an additional class. They wanted to take an online class or a college or university, rather than charging the Board of Education for each of those opportunities. We wanted families to pay for that. That is not true. That's suspended right now because we are offering the online programming. In the next paragraph, I'm recommending that we remove all of the requirements for community service. Again, it's still in line with state law because the requirements for community service start with the class of either 2022 or 2023. I'm sorry, I don't remember, but we will meet the requirement if we sophomore class. So the language is just amended to be for the class of 2022 and beyond. That's not to say that we're not going to continue to encourage our juniors to be involved in community service, and many of them have done community service. And we still can offer the credit for anybody who does 80 hours plus 10 hours of seat time. But we're just not going to make it a requirement until the class of 2022. And my thinking on that is certainly any senior right now who didn't finish community service doesn't really have an avenue to do that. And I'm concerned that our juniors may also have a deficit, if not this year, then if some of the predictions about what might happen with this pandemic turn out to be true, we may have students who won't be able to go out to hospitals next year or to daycares without concern about their health. So I thought rather than make this a requirement, we will still just really encourage the juniors to do this and give ourselves some time to get out of this health situation. Any questions for me on that? Okay. And the rest of the policy is the same.
So do we have any further discussion in regards to the changes happening in this policy? Any questions or concerns? Okay, so with that being said then, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the changes to the Series 5000 graduation requirements as presented, with the exception of 2 changes to the section under the class of 2020 adding in the notation of 4 electives, and then the change under classes graduating in 2022 and thereafter a 0.5 internship.
Moved.
Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second?
Second. Karina, the second.
A second by Karina. Okay. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? So moved. All right, moving on to the next policy that we're discussing, which is Series 5000 student attendance and truancy.
Okay, and this one will not require a vote. I just want to make the Board of Education aware of changes that I'm recommending to our regulations. So the attendance policy remains the same. It tracks the law. I did hear on a phone conference last week that the state is suspending their official absentee collection. I don't know what that means, but we're not suspending the way we record absences in our district, and we have reminded parents and families on more than one occasion that if their child cannot participate in online learning on any given day, that they need to call with, let us know if the child will be absent and explain why the child will be absent. And that's why we have all our calls, phones going forward to our secretaries so those things can be recorded. And also our nurses are being informed when there's absenteeism for obvious reasons. So the policy itself is still fine, but I do want to make you aware just of changes we're making in the regulations. So even the definition of absence on the first page of the regulation under Roman number 1, attendance and truancy, I felt it was important to change the definition of what is an absence. Because obviously you can't come to the school building during a school day. So in-district provided online learning or other forms of learning pre-approved by building administration, students who are not in attendance at those events are also considered to be absent. Going down to, whoops, I scrolled too quickly. Okay, going down to the next page, which is page number 4. Number 5, in attendance. So this is sort of the opposite of the absence definition. If you're in attendance any day during which a student is present at the student's assigned school or in-district provided online learning or other pre-approved forms of learning, or an activity sponsored by the school for at least half of the regular school day. Clearly, this is a policy that we're going to want to revert to its original, a regulation, we're going to want to revert to its original language when this situation is over. But I wanted to be clear that students weren't going to be penalized, but that they were held accountable for being present and taking part in their learning. On the next page, I'm sorry, 2 pages down, 2 pages down, page 6, number 4. Current language says neither email nor text message shall serve to satisfy the requirement of written documentation, except, I'm adding, except during the period when school is closed down because of the COVID-19 pandemic, during which time emails and phone calls from the parent, guardian, or other person in control of the child and responsible for the child's attendance in school will be accepted. Obviously, everything has to be remote right now. And then in the next one down, number 5, for the same reasons, we've added or telephone communication. That may be it. Oh, nope. On page 9, number 2, under letter F, it's the same thing. During the school district shutdown caused by COVID-19, engagement in classes on a daily basis will be considered evidence of attendance. So what we've said to teachers is, if you're not getting anything submitted by a student, or a student isn't weighing in or asking a question or communicating, at this point, you need to let an administrator or guidance counselor know so that we can find out what's going on. And there has been follow-up through phone calls, through emails, And I've talked with the chief of police about the opportunity, because obviously I don't want to send staff members out at this point in this situation. But we're almost asking the police to do a wellness if someone doesn't check in for a few days. Is everybody in this home okay? Do they need anything? Is there some reason why this student isn't checking into school?
Mm-hmm.
The next one is at the bottom of this.
Jan,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Jan, this is Karen. Just a quick question. I'm just wondering, has our attendance rate been relatively high? Are we okay with it, or are we spending a lot of time tracking down kids?
It's been very good. I'm actually going to get some counts tomorrow. The only count that I have so far is from Goodwin, and that was just one student that we're concerned about right now. I'm going to get some counts at the DLT meeting tomorrow, though we had some anecdotal conversations about students. I'm really kind of pleased because in talking with my colleagues in other school districts, especially bigger school districts, they're really struggling to locate some students. I think that we're very fortunate at Old Saybrook. We don't have a high transient population, and we do have students and parents who are connected with the school district. And so I think we've got a pretty good number, but I'll know more after tomorrow's meeting. I'll have some more specific data.
Okay, and I also think the fact that your communication has been excellent has been a huge help with this process as well.
Yeah, I think that we as a team realized early that engagement means constantly communicating, and increasingly as we go through this process, it's going to mean multiple ways of communicating and two-way communication. So we're seeing like senior class meetings starting up today, and parent meetings we're starting. And I think you're going to see more and more of that to try to keep kids and families engaged.
Right.
Letter G, number 2, monitoring. Again, just amending the language to fit the situation. And then that's it. That's the last one, according to my notes.
So Jan, you said this was a regulation that we don't need to vote on?
Right. But I really, because it's attendance, I really wanted to be sure that you had an opportunity to look at it, to understand it, and to ask any questions to me.
Do we have questions for Jan on this?
This is Karina. This is more of a curiosity. Does it address any of the ECP kids, or do they not have an attendance policy?
We're not required until kindergarten, I believe, to have.
Yeah, I think it said 5 years old. Yeah.
Yeah, attendance policy.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thanks, Karina. Anyone else? Questions? Okay. Well, then we'll move on to the next, which is Series 5000 student discipline.
This is really very nice that I can make the font bigger all on my own.
I like it, Jan.
Now I'm not squinting at the screen. So student discipline policy, I did a review of it looking for language specific to distance learning. And so there are really 3 amendments here. And the first one is in Roman numeral 2, letter A, right here. Scope of student discipline policy has always said conduct on school grounds or at a school-sponsored activity. And I want to be clear that school-sponsored activity includes activities sponsored through distance learning activities. We might wonder, how could anybody get themselves in trouble in a situation like that? But believe it or not, I think it can happen. You have students interacting with each other on technology, and while it's all gone really well, we want to be sure that students understand. These policies will be sent out to families in the coming days. We just wanted that they understand that is still a classroom, and we still expect decorum.
Eileen, was that you that joined back in?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay, just checking. Sure. Go ahead, Jan.
That's okay. Okay, so the next one is Roman numeral 3, Number 27, and this is the section of this policy that just lists all the different ways somebody could find themselves in a bad situation. And number 27, I won't read it to you, but, or perhaps I should, I'm not sure everybody has it in front of them, is possession and or use of a cellular, telephone, radio, portable audio player, CD player, BlackBerry personal data assistant, walkie-talkie, smartphone, mobile or handheld device, or similar electronic device on school grounds or at a school-sponsored activity, and this is where we added language, including any time in which a student is engaged in school-sponsored online learning. Again, just about setting appropriate standards for behavior there. And then the last one is also Roman numeral 3, number 37. Adding the word school-sponsored online learning platforms to the lists of technology and ways that people interconnect using technology that have standards for behavior associated with them. And that's it for this policy. Any questions for me?
Do you mind unmuting everybody so they can ask a question?
This is George. I mean, again, just outstanding work in terms of adding language. For some of these student disciplines, I can see where some of these regulations could continue after this crisis.
Yes.
So, whereas some of the previous one you were saying revert back, I can definitely see these continuing.
Yes, I think there were some components of the graduation requirement that we won't want to change back, but they'll still apply. And I think this one certainly has some components that will apply. We might want to change it from school-sponsored online. We may want to tweak the language, but I do think this is a brave new world we've entered into, and we're looking at it in a new way. And I do think that this is one of those policies that we may want to consider keeping that language.
I mean, especially if going forward, we have a lot more online classes, situations, right. Even if not in a pandemic situation. I think this is a really good language. Nicely done.
Yeah, and I think this goes to kind of Karina's point earlier too, asking about, whether we would necessarily need to revert all of these back, especially if we're going to continue.
I'm the program director over at Education.
I can't hear very well.
And I spoke with someone in security today. One of our other
speaking.
I think that's Dan Furman's line. That
I can't hear anything.
Yeah, sorry, Eileen. It was one of the background noise on one of our lines. Other questions for Jan on this policy?
So here's a question. I have a question on 27.
Go ahead, Eileen.
Yeah. So if I read this properly, possession or use of a cellular telephone, that's something, so are students not holding phones and carrying their phones with them?
No. So when we're in school, students may use these things. They just can't use them in violation of board policy. So they can't use them to do anything nefarious, basically.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. They can't do anything?
They can't use telephones, radio, CD players, or any new or antiquated technology in a way that is meant to do harm to other students, to our technology.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
It's the way in which they're being used.
Okay. I don't know if that was, yeah. Okay. That's exactly what my question was about. Okay. Thanks.
Other questions for Jan on this policy change? All right. Hearing no other questions, I'll ask for a motion to approve the changes to Series 5000 student discipline as presented. Do we have a motion for that?
This is Karina. I'll move.
It sounded like Karina, we had a motion from you, and do we have a second?
Spoke this morning to Julio Melendez and
Did I second for the motion?
I will second that motion, Karen.
All right, thank you, Karen. All in favor of approving the motion as presented, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Is that Sergio?
Do we have any noes? Anyone against the motion?
Okay.
Any abstentions?
Okay. So
all right, so moved.
I don't know.
And if you don't mind, like Jan Furman might be multitasking. So moving on to the next policy, which is Series 1000 use of district computer systems and internet.
I guess this one's self-explanatory. This is just one change. We have students using computers a lot more out of our school buildings. They're using our computers, they're using their own computers, they're using smartphones. So we wanted to articulate how we govern and control their use and where the limitations are as well. So that second paragraph really is the extent of the change.
Do we have any questions for Jan in regards to this change? Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the change to Series 5000 use of district computer systems and internet as presented?
Make a motion. This is Alan.
So it sounds like it was actually first moved by Eileen and second?
Karina.
Second by Karina, thank you. All in favor, aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. And then the last one that we're discussing is Series 6000 credit for online courses.
Again, pretty predictable here. So this policy throughout talks about pre-approval for online courses. That's not appropriate in our current situation. So we're changing the language to say that pre-approval is not required for any sponsored or created online learning that Old Saybrook Public Schools is offering. What I like about this sponsored or created by is we have teachers creating online learning all the time. They're also posting things that they're not creating but are sponsored by us. We also have in more normal, more typical times, we have programs that we sponsor that are purchased from elsewhere. We've used Odyssey where we've used a virtual learning academy, virtual high school. And so this language allows us to use those things without having to go through a approval process with administration. Obviously, if we're supporting, promoting, and offering it to students, there's no need for them to go through that. The only other change here, and it's a bit of semantics, is under additional requirements. So currently it reads only students in grades 9 through 12 are eligible to receive credit in online courses. Now that may be something that we want to continue in the future, but I wanted to make it clear that students in all grades K through 12 can earn credit towards promotion, meaning they can go from first grade to second grade, or towards graduation requirements in our given situation with our online learning. That's the extent of the changes, and this one really is largely semantics, but again, didn't want to have any arguments moving forward about what online learning meant during this time and whether or not it was valued as real coursework, because it is.
Do you have any questions for Dan about the changes to this policy?
This is Karina. I don't. I think it's well done. I agree with the changes. I think you had said the other day that the question about how credit is given is still under discussion as far as whether it's pass fail or whether it's graded. You guys are still evaluating that. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. Again, we're supposed to get some guidance from the state, and they have been doing the heavy lifting excuse me, of communicating with the university systems. The public systems, I think, they engaged in conversation very early, but they also started engaging with the private universities. And you may have seen that the Ivies most recently indicated that they were willing to accept pass-fail grades under this current situation. So I think what they're trying to do is line up as many of the institutions of higher learning as possible before they give us advice about whether or not pass-fail is appropriate. Interesting, I just would like to share, I know it's getting late, but I found this really interesting. I'm taking part once a week in these NEASC trainings. So New England Association of Secondary Schools and Colleges, our accreditation group that comes and accredits our high school. The two trainings I have sat in, they're only an hour long. They are fantastic. And today was 3 educators, 2 who are teaching in international schools in China, 1 in Hong Kong, 2 in Beijing, 1 in Hong Kong. And they've been doing distance learning with their kids in much the same way we did, overnight, having to put it together for the same reasons. And they're 10 weeks in now, and they were giving really good advice about many things. And the one place where they were still divided and undecided was how appropriately to grade students in this current situation. So it's a tricky issue. It's one we're grappling with through district leadership. We will eventually have to include teachers in that conversation and parents, but I'm waiting for guidance from the state. And the state won't tell us. I don't mean to imply that the state's going to come in and tell us how to grade. I don't think they're going to do that. I think what they're going to say is, it's up to you. Here are some things that we've done to make your decision easier. Here are some things to consider. And I think that will be helpful to us because they're talking with partners that we don't get access to.
That's great. Thank you for that explanation.
So Jan,
Yeah.
it looks like that the addition of the language under pre-approval for an online course would stay there regardless of the pandemic, but it appears that the other under additional requirements would be removed.
Are you saying after this current situation is over?
No, what I'm saying is that the adjustment that you made for pre-approval is in there regardless of whether there's a pandemic or not.
I would recommend that, yes.
So I'm just saying that, to me, that would stay there. You know, I'm meaning that when we go to revisit this, that is a new addition and the others under additional requirements would be removed.
Yes, that could be. I would agree right now. I think that would be a great way to go.
Okay. All right.
Other questions for Jan? Okay. Then I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the changes as presented to Series 6000 credit for online courses. Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second?
I'll second it. Jan, sorry.
Thank you, Jan. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
And any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. And so with that, I believe that it's the end of our agenda this evening. We do have a planned board meeting on April 28th. And if we have a need to get together again ahead of that, you know, we'll definitely reach out to the board, you know, for any other discussions that might come up. Jan, do you have any other comments?
No, I just, again, want to thank you all for coming out virtually and continuing on with us through these crazy times. And I wish you all the best of health, you and your families.
Thanks, Jan.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan, for all that you've done for our system for the district. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Absolutely.
And take care of yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Jen, are you okay?
George, I don't have anyone here to pour my water tonight.
I see. Okay.
That's funny.
That's all.
With that, then, everybody, I'd like to ask for a motion for adjournment. And I also want to say thank you for putting up with the changes to our technology. We're going to get better and better at this. So can I have a motion for adjournment?
So
moved.
down.
Okay, so it sounds like we had to move from
Simultaneous.
Did I have that right? All right, and all in favor, aye?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, so moved.
I'm sorry,
I will-
I missed the makers of that motion.
Yes.
I think it was Alan and Jan second.
Okay, great, thank you.
And thanks for setting up, Trent. Makes it very easy for us.
If you happen to be checking us out on our YouTube live stream, I'm sitting alone in a room.
Aren't we all? Aren't we all?
That's true. I'm sitting alone at the office in a room.
Oh. Good night, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night.